Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Oscar winner Davis Guggenheim, director of Still, a Michael J. Fox movie which explores the actor's personal and professional triumphs and travails and what happens when an incurable optimist confronts an incurable disease. Davis, what was your connection to Michael J. Fox, and how was this project brought to you, or did you seek it out? What made you want to tell this story?
Yeah, it was during COVID, and I was very blue. You might even say I was depressed. And I felt like I was in a personal rut and a professional rut. I felt like I've been making the same thing over and over again. And I was looking for some like joy in my work. And I read this interview with Michael where he'd had this it was a conversation about his most recent book, and his writing was so good. The storytelling was so good, but also there was a humor, a surprising humor and wisdom in his book. And I was like, I started to read it for myself. And as I read his books, then I listened to his books on tape, I was like, oh my God, this would be an amazing movie. I never thought I would direct it, but I was like, and then suddenly there were elements in his books that were just undeniably great.
And it really is his story. He's the subject. He's really the only one you interview. There aren't guest interviews or people talking about him. He's telling the story. Why did you opt to sort of allow him to say everything, and then really brilliantly weave in these clips from Family Ties and all of his movies to tell the story as if we're watching it unfold, almost like a narrative? It's genius the way it's edited together.
Thank you. My instinct when I pitched it to Apple TV Plus, I said I want to make it a movie that feels like a wild ride, like a Michael J. Fox movie from the '80s, with the color and the music, big score. And I wasn't going to do any interviews. And then last minute, I just said, let me just try one interview, like a really intimate single shot close up of him to see what that would be like. And he was so surprisingly funny and poignant that I did more and more of that. So we interviewed that one shot we did like 7 different times over the course of a 2-year production.
And he also doesn't care. I mean, he's very open about what he's going through in life. He's got a black eye. He crashed in and broke his cheek a few weeks prior. We see him fall on the sidewalk early on in the film. He's very open about the struggles that he's having. Is that, what was that like, just being around him and filming that?
With every documentary, you wonder, is this person going to let you in? And what do they not want to talk about? And what are they hiding? Or what are they hiding is too strong a word, but what are they avoiding? Right. And I've never encountered anything like this. Michael was a completely open book. Maybe it's his Parkinson's, but it's like the timing was, he's at a point in his life where he's got nothing to hide. And the other thing is, that when you mentioned that fall, I think the one thing he didn't want is to be perceived as someone who is, with a disability or someone with a disease. And he didn't want to be seen as someone pitied, or even noble and heroic. He wanted to be seen as, that irreverent, puckish, funny, and sometimes wise character.
He also does not miss a beat. I mean, he falls and some lady's like, "Are you okay?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, nice to meet you. You knocked me off my feet." I mean, his humor is right there. I also love the parts where you don't interview his family, but we see him with his family, and his kids are teasing him about his weird text messages that he sends them like days after responding. What was it like just to be around him and his family and see that dynamic? Because it's funny to see them all together.
Well, for a family that's like in the public eye and, a Hollywood family, if that's what you would call it, they actually live in New York, but they're so normal and so loving that, and I think Tracy and Michael make a big deal not to pull their children into that. They want to be regular people. And that scene is really quite funny because Michael starts by saying, we cut this in. He says, if my family ever said, "Oh, poor you, let me take care of you," he's like, "That'd be the worst thing in the world. I don't want to be treated any differently." And so the scene is he's he's trying to text his daughter. They talk about how he doesn't text very well, and it could easily be my family making fun of me, and like making fun of the dad being that awkward, dad who never gets anything right. It's very, very, very appealing and very funny.
It is. One of the things I just really want to highlight, again, maybe a little bit more in depth, is the way that the story is told. It's not like most documentaries that I've seen. Some of it is like stuff that you've appeared to film, and then other things are clips, like we've spoken about before from his TV shows and films. How much footage are you combing through? I mean, I feel like it would have taken forever to find like you talk about his marriage to Tracy, and then you find the perfect moment from Family Ties of them interacting in a scene that tells the story that he's telling, but it's completely out of context, but you wouldn't know it by what you're seeing. Talk about that process and your editor, Michael Hart, and what he was able to pull off.
Yeah, so I definitely had this instinct to push the form. Like I said, I was sort of in a rut, and I was like, well, let's see how far we can go. And because this is a quintessentially 80s story, let's be brash about it. Let's do anything we can. Let's try things. And my instinct was always to do recreations, and and we filmed a lot of them up in Vancouver. But Michael Hart, the editor, who's just a movie fanatic and a Michael J. Fox fanatic, would start to cut these scenes from different movies as scenes from his own life. And like one example, there's so many examples, but one example is, Michael and Tracy are both actors on this movie, Bright Lights, Big City. And the scene is them on a date, and they're walking in the streets of New York and Greenwich Village. And in real life, they're dating and falling in love. But the scene is them dating and falling in love. And he's the biggest movie star in the world at that point. And her character says, "Oh, I guess I'm supposed to be super impressed by your job." And it could be the character talking to the character, or it could be Tracy talking to Michael, because he's part of that scene is him. Part of that moment is him going through this moment where he's being treated very differently and he's a bit lost. But there they are walking in the street. It ends up with them having their first kiss. And the genius behind what Michael Hart did was to make that feel like their very first date. With the music and with the cutting and with the scenes before, you kind of go with it. You take this leap that it's actually happening in front of your eyes.
What was the most surprising thing you learned about Michael J. Fox through this process?
I think sometimes I'm guilty of this. Sometimes we think that someone who is funny is not particularly deep. The funny guy is quick with a joke, skipping on the surface of life. And I think when you see this movie and you meet him, you realize that there's a depth to him that a lot of us didn't acknowledge. And on top of that, a wisdom that has come with this incredible thing that happened to him. I mean, he's the biggest movie star in the world. And then he gets this diagnosis at 29. And he does all the wrong things before he does the right things. I don't want to give too much away, but through that process, through that him getting lost in the wilderness, he finds something. And in that, there's a wisdom that he has for us.
And a lot of poking fun at himself and his height. And you also tell the very interesting story of before he made it. I mean, getting to California with his father, and then just how much he struggled before. I mean, he was talking about selling his sofa off piece by piece. What were some of those stories like for you to hear?
Well, he also talked about going to IHOP and getting the little packets of jam, the Smucker's iPack.
Yeah.
And I go, why? He goes, to eat. It's amazing. The story is kind of remarkable. he drops out of high school. He's like 17. He looks 10, and that's why he goes to Hollywood, because casting directors think, well, if you look 10, you can play kids and have an advantage over the actors who are 10, who can't work longer hours. And his dad's this real tough guy in the, who was in the Army, and he convinces his dad to drive him down to Hollywood in their Aspen, in their Dodge Aspen, and it's a very rocky start for him. And he almost moves back. He's running out of money. He talks about that he's going to have to walk to the airport to fly home and work construction for his brother. But he has one last audition, and that's for Family Ties.
Wow. Well, it's such an insightful film, and it was so great to see. Davis, congratulations on this. Best of luck to you at the Emmys. Still a Michael J. Fox movie is available to stream on Apple TV+. And thanks for joining Gold Derby today.
Thank you.